Today we would like to introduce you to the petMAP Plus 2 multi-parameter monitoring system. The petMAP Plus 2 monitoring system is composed of a base unit and modules that plug into the side that expand the monitoring capability of the base unit. Let's just start with explaining the base unit itself. The base unit has connections for SpO2, blood pressure, and temperature on the top of the unit. The power button and the CO2 and ECG module connections are on this side. On the bottom is a plug for the AC/DC adapter, the mains power supply. The unit has 4 rechargeable AA cells, so when this unit is plugged in, it is trickle charging the rechargeable batteries, and if it's unplugged, it will continue to operate for a period of time away from any mains power source. Lastly, the SD card is on the last side of the unit, and the SD card is used for multiple purposes. The first is that if there is a software upgrade required, it can be loaded on SD card. But more importantly, the SD card is used for data capture and data transfer. When employed, the SD card captures every numeric value with a date and time stamp and also captures images of the screen display. On the back of the unit is the entrance to the battery compartment. Normally the batteries don't have to be changed, but if they do, this is how you access them. It's important to note that when the unit is new, it's going to come with a strip that protects the battery circuit during non-use, or from the point that it's manufactured to the point that it's used. All one simply does is take this strip and remove the plastic. Okay, now the batteries are engaged and the unit is ready to go. As you can see, the unit is currently resting in its pole mount cradle, which is an accessory that is optional. But most of the time we recommend that the unit be purchased with a protective cover, and it's very easy to install. You simply slip the bottom of the unit in and bring the cover around, and you can see the power button is still available. There's little flaps for the CO2 and ECG module connections. A hole obviously for the power supply and for the SD card. Lastly, there is a little opening here for an LED that's embedded in the case. When the batteries are fully charged, that LED will be green, and when the batteries are charging, that LED will be yellow. So this is a very handy device for protecting your investment in this very complete monitoring system. I'm just going to put this back into its cradle so that you can see the unit with the cover. So just a point about the SD card. This is obviously what an SD card looks like. To insert the card into the unit, you simply find the SD card slot and push it until it clicks. And it can stay in there. It will accumulate a lot of data over the time. When the time comes to actually access the files on the SD card, one simply pushes it again and remove it. Take it to your computer and do whatever makes sense at that point in time. Transfer the files, copy the image, make a printout for the owner, whatever suits your fancy at that point in time. Additionally, we talked about the AC/DC adapter. The AC/DC adapter, as we mentioned before, does plug in the bottom of the unit and then plugs into the wall. For North American customers and several other countries throughout the world, these are the correct plugs. But if you need to replace the blades with other international adapters, all you simply do is push and turn. The first thing that you may have to do when using your petMAP is you may have to set the date and time. The date and time are factory presets to Eastern Standard Time, so wherever you are located, you have to make adjustments. There are several features that are available in the setup menu, which is accessed a little bit differently. One would just put your finger on the screen, anywhere on the screen, and hit the power button, and what you get is a series of commands. I'm going to go over the most frequently used one first, and that's setting date and time and altitude if CO2 is in use. This is the screen that displays, and you just hit the set button to tab through the various elements on the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the altitude, for instance, from 1,000 to some higher 1,800 feet, and then we can tab to, for instance, the date and time and month and day, and you just press increase or decrease to adjust those. Once you have everything the way you want it, you just hit exit, and that takes you back to those settings are saved, and it takes you back to the main power. So when you power the unit on, this is the basic display. You'll see that the commands are in a light sky blue color and they're touchable. There's 3 rows of them on the main screen, and you can also see what the version of software is here that's displayed on the splash screen as the unit comes up. So at this point in time, what I can do is I can start connecting sensors and demonstrating how the unit operates in the base mode. So let's talk about blood pressure measurement with the petMAP Plus 2. First of all, the blood pressure connection is actually at the top of the unit, and the unit comes with 2 blood pressure extension hoses. One is for smaller cuffs, sizes 2 through 5.5. The other is for larger cuffs, 6.5 and 8. The blood pressure hose just connects into the top connecting, press and twist lightly, and then this is the connection for the blood pressure cuff. So as before, you just twist and press, and then you have your blood pressure connection system. Okay. So the first thing that one would do typically when measuring a blood pressure is one would set the species and cuff site. So the selections display on the top of the unit. There are 3 settings for dog: the forearm, the hindfoot, and the tail. Same 3 settings for cat: forearm, hindfoot, and tail. And then the non-optimized mode. The non-optimized mode is used for anything other than a dog or a cat, or if one wants the petMAP readings to more closely match non-optimized devices, such as a Doppler. Okay? You can either now initiate a blood pressure reading by hitting BP Go, or what you can do is you can set a cycle for blood pressure, and you would do that here. So the settings are stat, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it continues to go up in increments of 5. To press and hold brings all the settings back to 0. So let's just say that I want to take a blood pressure on my finger here, and I'm going to want to do that every 3 minutes. So I would press this to 3 and I would hit BP go. At this point in time, the cuff will automatically inflate and you'll see the pressure bar. You will see the pressure coming down. That's this step deflate line. And you will also see the oscillometric waveform. You're looking for a bell-shaped curve to indicate that motion has not affected your reading. Systolic, diastolic, mean arterial pressure, and pulse rate from blood pressure. The system is going to continue to produce readings every 3 minutes. And it's going to, if you have an SD card, it's going to be saving them to SD. It also writes them to a trend line and a history of the values. Okay. Lastly, with blood pressure, you can actually set a low and a high limit on systolic pressure. And you do that, again, just by pressing the buttons and momentarily and adjusting them to the values that you want. To turn those settings off, once again, you just press and hold. When there are multiple readings in the system for blood pressure, you're going to see that the unit will automatically average them for you. And it's going to create what we call the nominal session value, which is really a statistically accurate indication of the readings in the unit. So here is my NSV systolic, my NSV diastolic, and my NSV heart rate. Okay. So just a note about the top part of this screen display. This, of course, is the pressure being reduced in the cuff. It's called the step deflate method. And the green and the purple lines are actually the oscillations for the blood pressure. As mentioned earlier, you're looking for a bell-shaped curve on either one or the other of the purple or the green lines. The maximum oscillations, of course, in the oscillometric method is the mean arterial pressure, and then the systolic and diastolic are derived from the algorithms in the software itself. So that's how you get systolic, diastolic, mean arterial pressure, which is the maximum oscillations in the curve, and the heart rate. And just a note about the bottom part of the display, this is where the results are displayed. This is your tabular trend of the numeric values with the time offset, the systolic, diastolic, mean, and heart rate. This area is the graphical trend where the top of the bar is the systolic, the bottom of the bar is diastolic, and the white corresponds to the heart rate. It's interesting, but what you can do is touch this part of the screen to increase the length of the trend, probably more useful in surgery, and touch it again, and it really toggles between the two types of displays, the tabular display with the short trend line or the longer trend line. So next we're going to talk about the other two parameters that are monitored in the base unit, the pulse oximetry as well as the temperature. Both of these are continuous measurements they are connected at the top of the unit just like the blood pressure. So to connect the pulse ox, what you simply do is connect it and push it in firmly, and then the clip is the standard pulse ox sensor that comes with the unit, and of course it's typically placed on the tongue but can be placed on the ear or the toe or the prepuce vulva, wherever there is a capillary bed that can sense pulse oximetry. To turn pulse oximetry on, you simply touch this button. You see the red light comes on in the sensor, right? And I'm just going to put this on my finger, and you can see how I'm going to get the plethysmal graphic waveform as well as the pulse ox value and the heart rate value. What I can do is I can set the cardiotach volume to anywhere from off to a setting of 5, corresponding to the loudest, and you're going to see the pulse strength, the plethysmographic waveform, the values, as well as hear the cardiotac. Just like with blood pressure, I can set an alarm for low pulse ox just by touching this button here and just stop wherever I want to see it. Press and hold to disable the alarm. Similarly, temperature is measured using either a rectal temperature probe or an esophageal temperature probe. The esophageal temperature probe, of course, is white and it's longer. The rectal is red and it's shorter. Both of these probes cannot connect directly to the unit, but we have what's called a temperature extension cable, which plugs in right next to the blood pressure, and then the temperature probe is connected like that. Okay, so this can either be placed in the esophagus in the case of the white, or in the rectum in the case of the red. The temperature is displayed just below the pulse ox values. So we've gone through all of the user selections. We've gone through the blood pressure selections, which consist of setting a cycle or a high or low alarm on systolic. We've gone through the SpO2 commands, which consist of turning SpO2 on, adjusting the volume of the cardiotac, as well as adjusting a low alarm if the user so desires. Your species and cuff site are associated with blood pressure, as is the BP start. The last button here is the Save Screen button, and you can at any time touch that button, which will capture the entire image of the screen in a JPEG file and write it to the SD card. In addition, there's a small button just above the Save Screen that provides you additional options that you can save the screen automatically every 1 minute, every 2 minutes, or every 3 minutes, or in fact on every blood pressure reading if that's what you choose to do. So you simply touch that button to toggle it, and it allows you to make those selections. Monitoring ECG is very easy with the petMAP Plus 2. As mentioned previously, the side of the petMAP Plus 2 has connections for both CO2 and for ECG. Okay, so the ECG is actually a module that is connected by a cable to the side of the unit, and it simply plugs in just like that. When you hear the click, you know it's plugged in. The ECG has several connections that you should be aware of. The first are the 3 surface leads that correspond to the surface electrodes. So you simply plug these in. It's intuitive. And the color match for the black, white, and red. Okay. In addition, the ECG module has the capability of doing esophageal ECG, and that is what this connection is for over here. Okay, as you're monitoring ECG, you may find it useful to adjust the gain, and that is done by this switch here. You can increase the gain by sliding it to high, that's medium, and that's low. So you simply just slide that switch as you desire. The esophageal leads, as I mentioned, plug in right here, And there are actually two different sizes. One is the larger size for dog, and the other is a smaller size for cats and small dogs. The ECG leads have band electrodes, which will determine the heart rate, the ECG waveform, as well as will measure the core temperature. So back at the unit, ECG is controlled by this button here, which when you plug the cable into the unit, it's going to automatically appear and say off ECG. And when you press that, you're going to get the ECG waveform. And if the ECG is reliable, the heart rate that was previously associated with the pulse ox is now going to become the ECG heart rate. Okay, this is a lead 2 system, and this is where you're seeing the QRS complexes. The petMAP Plus 2 can also monitor end-tidal CO2 and respiration rate, and that's done with our mainstream end-tidal CO2 module. The unit comes with two airway adapters, one for smaller patients and one for larger patients. Either of these airway adapters actually sit in the breathing circuit, and they're connected on both ends for the ventilator for your intubated patients. And then the module itself simply slides over the top of and snaps into place, of the airway adapter and snaps into place. So that's the positioning on the patient end. On the monitor end, just like with ECG, all you simply do is put the connector into the unit until it snaps in place. And there you have the setup for CO2. To begin monitoring with CO2, you simply press the CO2 on button. And you'll notice that what you're going to get is the end-tidal CO2 number as well as the respiration rate. You're also going to get the capnograph in a short version, but just as indicated before, this whole lower part of the screen actually changes simply by touching it. So in this display, you get a longer capnograph in addition to the respiration rate and the end-tidal CO2. In this display, you get no CO2. You just get a short trend of pulse ox, blood pressure, and temperature, and a tabular listing of those values. And this is a longer trend of the numeric blood pressure values. So simply tabbing the screen or touching the screen tabs between all four of those different screens. As indicated earlier, there are certain things in the setup screen that require you to touch the screen at the same time that you press the power button. It will become necessary to zero the CO2 sensor every time the airway adapter is changed. As we mentioned, there's a large airway adapter and a small airway adapter. So when you change them in between the different size patients, you need to go to this screen. And the screen just basically is going to give you some commands, and it's going to tell you when it's done zeroing the sensor. And once you've done that, then you can go back to normal monitoring mode.